Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of our video history of the Nathan Denison House. In our first video, we took you room by room through the historic 1790 structure, starting with the kitchen, then the office, then the family room, and eventually moving on upstairs to the bedrooms. That video is available on the Society's YouTube channel, along with this one, so you may want to start there if you haven't viewed that one already. However, today, in part 2, we're going to talk a little bit about the people in the house, particularly the women, and what the women wore. We discussed children's fashion a little bit in our first video, but we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty in this one, and actually show you the pieces on a real live model. One of our members of the Historical Society Board of Directors, Sherry Emershaw. So we hope you will sit back and enjoy this video that is once again being provided to you as a service through grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, and Luzerne County itself. So sit back and enjoy, and if you have any questions or comments, you can either leave them below, or you can email us at info@luzernehistory.org. Hi, Sherry.
Hello.
You're going to take us through the ladies' rooms?
Yes, this is the bedroom of the girls in the Nathan Denison home. The Denisons had 4 girls. That's why this room is very large for this home. What's interesting is the bed. Since they had 4 girls, 2 of the younger girls would sleep on the smaller bed, and the older girls would sleep on the larger bed. And when they got up and they made their bed, the small bed would be slide right underneath the large bed for extra room. And they needed a lot of room, the girls, because they were doing what women did back then in young girls. They would do a lot of sewing and mending and making things. For example, they would be laying all material out on this floor to cut patterns to make their clothes, so they would need a lot of extra room. And not only did they make clothing for themselves, they also mended the clothes for the family, okay, for the father and of course their 3 brothers. They would also make items for when they were going to get married at some point. That's why we have such a very large chest here in this room, because they would store some of the linens that hopefully someday that they would use for when they had their own household and their own family.
Now, you mentioned the clothing. I see you brought some clothing to show us today.
Well, primarily what I put on the bed is what they would have worn underneath their clothing. Okay. First and foremost, all young girls and women would wear what we call a chemise. This was a staple. This was worn all day. This served as a nightgown at night. So this was their underwear, per se. Also here, we have something quite interesting. This is called stays. These are what we call stays. And they were called a corset during the Victorian times. They were not held tightly or tied tightly during the 18th century. They were loosely fit to get more like a funnel look on a woman's shape.
So you're not going for the Coke bottle yet?
No, we're not going for the Coke bottle yet. No, or the 17-inch waist. Absolutely not. So here, she would put her corset over her chemise. That is how they would put it on. Then she would put her stockings on. The stockings, as you could see, quite tall, and they would be held on with a garter. Over here, we have something quite interesting, and you're probably wondering what they are.
I'm guessing they're not gloves? They're not gloves?
No, they're not gloves. They are pockets. Women's pockets were not invented to the late 1800s. So women would wear pockets underneath their petticoat. And this is a petticoat. A lot of people want to call this a skirt, but it's properly known as a petticoat. They were made out of wool for the colder weather, which I'm wearing today. And of course, you can see my stockings. And in the summer months, they would use linen. But over the chemise, and after I put my stays on, I would put my pockets on. And they would actually be, if you were to look underneath my petticoat, they would be here, underneath. So each here of these, that's where my pocket would be. That's where I would direct the pocket to be. Now, I'm very proud of this particular pocket because sometimes pockets were worn outside to show off if they had done some nice needlework. This one's done, I'm very proud to say I made this, and it's beautiful needlework. So I would be proud of my workmanship, and I'd want to show it off. So you could wear them either underneath your petticoat or you could over your clothing to show off a very finely made one.
Now you're putting stays on top of chemises and pockets on top of all that. How long did it take you to get ready today?
Not very long. It's getting dressed back then was not much of an ordeal. Everyone was used to it. Another thing that they would have to wear too is what we call a fichu. And you will notice that I'm wearing a fichu or a neck kerchief. They could be plain white, which was very common, or off-white. And they could be very colorful. Were block printed. And to embellish a plain gown, just to add some color. Instead of a drab brown or an off-white, they would add color with their fichus. It would just, as you could see how I'm adding a little bit of color to this plum-colored, this is called a short gown. What I'm wearing is called a short gown, and this particular short gown is made out of wool. Again, it's because of the cold weather.
It's a bit chilly today.
Yes, it is quite a bit chilly today.
It was a good choice.
Also, for me to carry my belongings, if I was traveling, I would use what we call a haversack. This haversack is done with beautiful crewel work, which I would have been very proud to display this as well. As you can see, the needlework and the workmanship is quite exquisite. And that is what I would have carried my belongings in when traveling. In addition to my pockets, I would have carried a lot in my pockets as well.
Now, you mentioned the pockets, and you have the fancier pockets and the more plain pockets.
Right.
How many could you wear?
Well, practically, I could wear as many as I want, but for practical purpose, since I only have 2 openings on my petticoat, I would just wear the 2.
Right.
For sufficient things that I would put in my pockets for working around the house, 2 is enough. Added, if I was traveling somewhere, I would use my haversack as well for other belongings. Okay, so before we go into the ladies' dressing room, let me show you what I'm wearing, okay? So here I have my stockings on, which I had showed you before, and I just wanted to show you that I have my chemise here, okay? My pocket exposed here because it's a beautiful pocket. I'm wearing my garters to keep my stockings up. Also, I am wearing a very comfortable shoe. This is a shoe that most women would have worn daily around the home. It has a very low heel and, of course, a very simple buckle. So this would have been the standard shoe that a woman would have worn around her home. They're very comfortable, no heel, flat, and very practical. Also, another staple that a woman would have worn is her apron. Not only did it add color and decorum to her outfit, it was also used to wipe her hands, to protect her from getting anything on her clothing. And of course, if she were to gather items, she would be able to, for example, gather wood in her petticoat or gather some fruits and vegetables if she was outside. So this was a very practical item to wear. It was also, even the aristocracy in the 18th century would wear them as a fashion statement. They were very finely made, not practical, they were more like for decorum. But here in Wyoming Valley, where the Nathan Denisons lived, this was a practical staple for every woman for her workday.
Function over form.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, Mark, we just were in the girls' bedroom, and now we've made our way into the girls' dressing room.
Okay.
And I wanted to show you the clothing of what you would see what the women would wear if they were walking down the street or working around the house.
Okay.
So here we have what a woman would have worn here around the home. Betsy Denison and the girls would have worn what we call a short gown made out of linen, and her petticoat would have been linen. This is more or less during the warm summer months. Her hat would have been what we call a shepherdess hat, a very wide brim to keep the sun out of her eyes. And of course, this would have been worn with the shoes that I'm wearing here.
Right.
Okay, this is a very simple, everyday clothing for working around the home, working in the garden, helping her husband perhaps in the field or whatnot.
Not what you'd wear to church.
Not what you would wear at church, exactly. So then we could make our way over here to the dressing table. Maybe getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I wanted to show you what they would have embellished some of their clothing with. First and foremost, a woman always wore a mob cap, always had her hair concealed. It was never exposed.
Okay.
Her hat would even be worn over the mob cap. She would never take the mob cap off.
All right.
Okay. Here we have, which was very popular in the late 18th century, is a bonnet. This is made out of silk. It is not your typical hat. It has what we call more or less like a visor. The whole point of hats, especially in the summer, they were worn low on the crown. They were more like a visor to keep the sunlight out of their eyes and to protect their skin and face from sunburn. Here's fingerless gloves. I am wearing everyday hand knit ones for around the house. These would have been worn. These are actually silk and they are higher. They would have been worn if I was perhaps maybe going to church or on a daily visit to someone's home. I would be visiting them. Of course, they would decorate with a lot of ribbons. And of course, if they were visiting and it was warm, they always brought a fan. This is actually a wooden fan. And perhaps if she was going somewhere special, she could have embellished her gown or even her hat, which I have an example of a cockade. Okay. Just for decoration. Decorations on women's clothing were very, very simple. Because here we're in Wyoming Valley, we're not in the fine cities such as Boston and Philadelphia. They were farmers, they were simple folk here, so they had simple clothing. I'm wearing a mob cap. They came in all different shapes. This is another example. It's more has more ruffles on it of a mob cap. Now over here we have maybe a gown that would be wear for visiting someone. Okay, she's got, of course, her apron, and here we have a pocket underneath. We have her petticoat and her hat. This is a summer or spring outfit, and you could see the straw hat, and this particular hat, which they would have decorated themselves. It's straw, has a cockade to embellish it, to make it look a little bit, a little bit more decor for her outfit. Below here we have a pair of shoes which are quite interesting. Not all women's shoes had buckles. Some, in order to add color or change, depending on the color they were wearing, they could wear different ribbons to tie the shoe. So they didn't always have to have the buckles on. Just tying them with ribbon was enough as well. This one has a little bit more of a heel on it because it was used, of course, to wear more like a Sunday best outfit, or a outfit visiting a neighbor or a family member.
Now, would the ribbon have been purely for decoration, or would it have functioned the way shoelaces function
It
today?
functions the way shoelaces are. If you could see, it does not. It just has that opening there, just the
two
one.
little loops, right.
Correct. And then any color they had on hand, they would use, or if they were lucky enough, they would have different colors depending on the different color of the outfit that they were wearing. Although they were simple folk, women are still women. Women like to look good. No matter what century we're in, women always like to, look pretty.
And a little color goes a long way.
Exactly, exactly. On the hook here, we have a cloak. This is a wool cloak, which she would have worn. The girls would have had their own cloaks on a day like today, when it's chilly out. And of course, it hooks with this clip here. It's just a simple wool cloak. That is what they would have worn. They did not have coats with sleeves. It was a cloak. Over here we have a gown, what we call a Polyness gown. This was a gown used for special occasions such as a wedding, or if they were going to having a party at someone's home. As you can see, this one actually clips here. This has it's actually three pieces. We have the petticoat underneath. We have the gown that wraps around and then pins to hook this together. So we have the color matching the petticoat. And of course, simple ribbons. And of course, the sleeves decorated with the lace. And of course, we have the fichu. Now, depending on the event, they did not have to wear the fichu. Sometimes if it was a very grand occasion, which was few and far between here in Wyoming Valley, she would not have worn the fichu, and she would have worn a maybe pearl necklace or a necklace of some kind of stone, like a garnet or whatnot, and pearls. And she would have eliminated that and shown a little bit of skin. Yeah, that was quite daring back then. Okay, Mark, the last gown I want to point out is called a Polyness Gown. And one thing I want to point out that I may not have told you is you notice I am not wearing any buttons.
I did actually notice that. I was going to ask you about that.
Yes, but women did not have buttons on their clothing. To close them, they either laced them, or in this example, they would use pins. That is how they fastened them together. On the top, I have a decorative pin, a little bit of a bling per se for this particular outfit. It has the petticoat, a floral petticoat, and a matching hat embellished with ribbon, feathers as well, beautiful pheasant feathers, and a cockade to make it even look more pretty. Of course, she's wearing her fichu on the outside. It's not all the way tucked in, so that's a different way women would have worn their fichu. If you look, I have two examples of shoes that maybe this outfit would have had. Mules. Mules are popular today, and they were popular back then. These are beautiful tapestry mules, and to the right are very fancy buckled shoes, more of the French style. Fancy buckle, fancy heel. So this would have been an outfit that a woman here in Wyoming Valley would have been very proud to have worn on any special occasion. She would have made quite the fashion statement in this outfit.
Now, the pins, which, looking at them here, I mean, they're not safety pins. They're quite sharp.
No.
Was that for practicality, or were there just not buttons? I mean, I know, male clothing had buttons on top of buttons on top of buttons.
Right, male clothing had plenty of buttons. The reason that they had pins and not buttons was because women clothing, they did not have many clothes. They were constantly pregnant, so they were always expanding their clothes as well as contracting them. So for all practicality, pinning them was easier. The petticoat did not have a button on it either. It had a string to tie it together for expansion and contraction, because women were always with child for the most part of their adult life.
One size had to fit all.
Exactly. Perfect. Yes.
Well, thank you, Sherry. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully everybody at home learned a lot, and we'll see you in the spring again.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
My pleasure.